They called you weak because you chose kindness. They called you naive because you believed in people. They mistook your patience for weakness, your compassion for vulnerability, and your silence for surrender. But what they never understood was that beneath every scar they left, something stronger was being created. You were never the villain in this story. You were the angel who kept giving chances, even when the world kept taking advantage. Yet every betrayal, every lie, and every disappointment pushed you closer to a truth they never saw coming. They didn't create your darkness. They simply forced you to discover the power you had all along. From the very beginning, you carried something rare into this world. You treated people with respect when they had done nothing to earn it. You offered understanding when others offered judgment. You chose patience when anger would have been easier. You believed that being good was enough, that sincerity would eventually be recognized, and that kindness would be returned with kindness. But reality introduced you to a different lesson. The world is not always moved by pure intentions. Some people see a kind heart and view it as an opportunity. They see generosity and think it is weakness. They see forgiveness and assume there are no boundaries. They see silence and mistake it for fear. You spent years trying to prove that goodness still mattered, never deserved. You ignored warning signs because you wanted to believe the best in others. You excused behavior that should have never been tolerated. You convinced yourself that if you just loved harder, worked harder, sacrificed more, things would eventually change. Yet the more you gave, the more certain people took. The more patient you became, the more comfortable they became crossing lines. They never appreciated the strength it took to stay calm when chaos surrounded you, understood how much discipline it required to remain kind when bitterness would have been justified. What hurt the most was not the attacks from enemies. It was the disappointment from people you trusted, the people who knew your heart, the people who knew your intentions, the people who benefited from your loyalty. Instead of protecting your kindness, they tested it. Instead of respecting your patience, they stretched it. Instead of valuing your presence, they assumed you would always be there. They became so accustomed to your forgiveness that they stopped feeling accountable for their actions. They believed your kindness was permanent, no matter how they treated you. That is the dangerous illusion people create when they underestimate a good person. They think kindness is a limitation when it is actually a choice. They think patience means a lack of power when it often requires more power than aggression. They think restraint means weakness when it is often evidence of tremendous self-control. The strongest people are not always the loudest. They are often the ones carrying burdens no one sees while still showing up with dignity. They are the ones fighting private battles while continuing to encourage others. They are the ones absorbing pain without making it everyone else's problem. For a long time, you allowed people to define you according to their own assumptions. If they called you weak, you questioned yourself. They were right. If they ignored your efforts, you tried even harder to earn their approval. But eventually something changed. You began noticing a pattern. The same people who called you weak relied on your strength. The same people who criticized your kindness depended on your compassion. The same people who underestimated you were often benefiting from the very qualities they mocked. You started realizing that your kindness was never the problem. The problem was where you invested it. Your heart was never too soft. Your standards were simply too low for those who didn't deserve access to it. Your patience was never excessive. It was often being wasted on people committed to repeating the same behavior. The issue was not that you cared too much. The issue was that you expected others to value what you freely gave. As this realization grew stronger, something inside you began to shift. You stopped chasing validation from people who could not recognize your worth. You stopped explaining yourself to those determined to misunderstand you. You stopped shrinking your light to make others comfortable. The kindness remained, but it was no longer available to everyone. The compassion remained, but it was now protected by wisdom, no longer confused with permission. Every betrayal leaves a mark. Some scars are visible, but the deepest ones are often hidden beneath a smile, buried behind silence, and carried through years without anyone noticing. There was a time when you believed loyalty was enough to protect relationships. You believed honesty would create trust, and that genuine intentions would be met with genuine intentions. You thought that if you stood by people during their difficult moments, they would stand by you when your storms arrived. But life has a way of revealing who people truly are when convenience disappears and sacrifice becomes necessary. The first betrayal shocked you because it came from a place you considered safe. It wasn't just about what happened, it was about who did it. You never expected the person who knew your struggles, your dreams, and your vulnerabilities to become the source of your disappointment. The pain wasn't created by strangers. Strangers don't have access to the parts of you that matter. The deepest wounds come from people who were trusted with your heart and chose to treat it carelessly. In that moment, something changed, not because you wanted it to, but because reality forced it. You began questioning everything. You questioned your judgment. You questioned your instincts. You replayed conversations in your mind, searching for clues you may have missed. You wondered how long the deception had existed before you noticed it. You wondered whether the signs were always there and whether your belief in people had blinded you to the truth. Those questions followed you for days, months, sometimes even years. Yet hidden inside every painful question was a lesson waiting to be discovered. The lesson was never that everyone is untrustworthy. The lesson was that trust should be earned, not automatically given. The lesson was that not everyone deserves unlimited access to your energy, your time, or your loyalty. You learned that some people appreciate your presence while others simply take advantage of your availability. You learned that words are easy, but actions reveal character. Character is revealed when keeping those promises requires effort. As more disappointments appeared throughout your journey, each one taught something different. One betrayal taught you the importance of boundaries. Another taught you the danger of ignoring red flags. Another taught you that people often reveal themselves long before they hurt you, but hope convinces you to look away. Each experience added another layer of wisdom. At the time, it felt like loss. Looking back, it was education. Expensive education, painful education nonetheless. There were moments when bitterness seemed easier than growth. After all, pain has a way of making people build walls. When trust is broken repeatedly, it becomes tempting to stop believing in anyone. It becomes tempting to assume every person has hidden motives, and every relationship carries future disappointment. Many people remain trapped in that mindset for years. They allow the actions of a few people to poison their view of everyone else. They become prisoners of experiences they never deserved. But somewhere within your struggle, you discovered something powerful. Betrayal can either destroy your wisdom or create it. It can make you permanently cynical, or it can make you permanently aware. Awareness is different from fear. Awareness allows you to see reality clearly without becoming emotionally closed. Awareness teaches you to recognize patterns without assuming everyone is the same. Awareness allows you to remain kind while becoming harder to manipulate. The scars never completely disappear. Certain memories still return when life becomes quiet. Certain names still remind you of lessons you wish you never had to learn. Certain experiences still carry traces of sadness, but those scars tell a story. They remind you that you survived situations designed to break your spirit. They remind you that disappointment did not end your journey. They remind you that every painful experience contributed to the person you are becoming. What once felt like damage slowly transformed into wisdom. What once felt like weakness slowly became discernment. What once felt like heartbreak slowly became strength. The people who betrayed you may never understand the impact they had on your life. They may never recognize the lessons their actions created. They may never realize that every scar they left behind eventually became a reminder of how much stronger, wiser, and more self-aware you had become. Pain has a strange way of revealing what comfort can never teach. When life is easy, most people never discover who they truly are. They move through their days believing they understand their limits, their strength, and their character. But those beliefs are often untested. It is only when pressure arrives, when everything familiar begins to collapse, that a person comes face to face with the parts of themselves they never knew existed. The pain you experienced was never something you asked for. You did not volunteer for the disappointments, the betrayals, the rejection, or the loneliness. Yet those experiences became the very forces that awakened something powerful within you. There was a version of you that existed before the struggle. That version trusted more easily. That version expected fairness from people who had never earned the right to receive trust. That version believed effort alone could solve every problem. While there was beauty in that innocence, there was also vulnerability. You walked through life with your heart exposed, believing others would treat it with the same care you offered them. Then reality arrived with lessons you never wanted to learn. The pain did not arrive all at once. It came in stages, one disappointment after another, one broken promise after another. one moment of disrespect after another. At first you tried to ignore it. You convinced yourself things would improve. You told yourself people would change. Chances should have been enough. But eventually the weight became impossible to deny. The truth stood directly in front of you, demanding to be acknowledged. Those moments felt unbearable because they forced you to confront something difficult. You could no longer live according to the illusion of who people pretended to be. You had to see them for who they actually were. More importantly, you had to see yourself clearly. You had to recognize the habits, beliefs, and patterns that allow certain situations to repeat themselves. Self-awareness is often born through discomfort. Without pain, many truths remain hidden forever. As the pressure increased, something unexpected began to happen. Instead of breaking completely, you adapted. Every challenge demanded a stronger version of yourself. Every setback required a deeper level of resilience. Every disappointment forced you to develop emotional muscles you never knew you possessed. The same situations that once devastated gradually became situations you could survive. Then they became situations you could learn from. Eventually, they became situations you could grow through. The strength that emerged was not loud. It did not announce itself with dramatic speeches or grand displays. Real strength rarely works that way. It develops quietly. It grows during sleepless nights when nobody sees your struggle. It grows when you continue moving forward despite feeling exhausted. It grows when you choose discipline over excuses and progress over self-pity. Day by day, challenge by challenge, the person you were becoming slowly replaced the person you used to be. Many people misunderstand strength. They think strength means never feeling pain. They think strong people are unaffected by loss, rejection, or disappointment. The truth is very different. Strong people feel everything. They experience the same emotions, the same heartbreak, and the same moments of doubt. The difference is that they refuse to let those experiences define their future. They acknowledge the pain, learn from it, and continue moving forward despite it. There came a moment when you realized something important. The struggles that once seemed like punishment were actually preparation. The obstacles that appeared to block your path were shaping your character. The setbacks that felt unfair were teaching lessons success could never provide. Every difficult chapter was building qualities that comfort never could. Patience became stronger. Awareness became sharper. Discipline became deeper. Confidence became rooted in experience rather than opinion. You began noticing changes within yourself. Situations that once controlled your emotions no longer had the same power. The opinions of people who once influenced your decisions became less important. Fear started losing its grip because you had already survived experiences you once thought would destroy you. The more challenges you overcame, the less intimidating future challenges appeared. Confidence was no longer based on hope alone. It was based on evidence. You had proof of your resilience because you had lived through adversity and emerged stronger on the other side. The pain did not create your potential. That potential was always there. What pain did was remove the illusions, distractions, and limitations that prevented you from seeing it. Hidden beneath every struggle was a stronger identity waiting to emerge, a version of yourself forged through pressure, sharpened through adversity, and awakened by circumstances that demanded more from you than you ever thought you could give for far too long. You carried a habit that quietly stole pieces of your confidence. You apologized for things that never required an apology. You apologized for having boundaries. You apologized for protecting your time. You apologized for speaking your truth. You apologized when other people felt uncomfortable with your growth. Somewhere along the way you were taught that being agreeable was more important than being authentic. You learned that keeping everyone happy seemed safer than risking disapproval. As a result, you spent years shrinking parts of yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for your full potential. You became skilled at making others comfortable, even when it came at your own expense. If someone crossed a line, you questioned whether you were being too sensitive. If someone disrespected you, you searched for reasons to justify their behavior. If someone demanded more than you could reasonably give, you convinced yourself that saying no would make you selfish. Little by little, your desire to avoid conflict trained you to abandon your own needs. You became available to everyone while becoming increasingly unavailable to yourself. What made this pattern so dangerous was that it often looked like kindness from the outside. People praised your patience. They admired your willingness to help. They appreciated your generosity. But very few people noticed the exhaustion behind it. Very few people saw the emotional cost of constantly putting yourself last. They enjoyed the benefits of your sacrifices without understanding how much those sacrifices were draining you. The more you ignored your own limits, the more certain people expected unlimited access to your energy. Then life forced you into situations where continuing the old version of yourself became impossible. The pressure became too great. Disappointments became too frequent. The lessons became too clear to ignore. You realized that constantly accommodating everyone else was not creating peace. It was creating resentment. It was creating frustration. It was creating a growing distance between who you truly were and who you felt obligated to be. The transformation did not happen overnight. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Setting boundaries felt unnatural because you had spent years avoiding them. Speaking honestly felt risky because you were accustomed to protecting other people's feelings before considering your own. Walking away from unhealthy situations felt harsh because you had always been the one who stayed longer than necessary. Every step toward self-respect initially felt like rebellion against the version of yourself people had grown comfortable with. What surprised you most was how certain people reacted when you changed. The same individuals who benefited from your endless patience suddenly accused you of being different. The same people who enjoyed your lack of boundaries became uncomfortable when boundaries appeared. The same people who took your availability for granted felt offended when access to your time and energy was no longer unlimited. Their reaction revealed something important. They never wanted the healthiest version of you. They wanted the version they could control. That realization hurt, but it also brought clarity. Not everyone celebrates growth. Some people only support your evolution when it remains convenient for them. The moment your growth requires them to adjust their behavior, their support disappears. Their disappointment has nothing to do with your transformation and everything to do with losing the advantages they once enjoyed. As your confidence grew, so did your understanding of strength. You learned that becoming hard to break does not mean becoming cold-hearted. It does not mean becoming cruel. It does not mean abandoning compassion. Real strength allows kindness to exist alongside boundaries. It allows empathy to exist alongside self-respect. It allows generosity to exist without self-sacrifice becoming a permanent lifestyle. You stopped feeling guilty for protecting your peace. You stopped apologizing for refusing to tolerate disrespect. You stopped explaining every decision to people committed to misunderstanding you. You realized that not everyone deserves a front row seat in your life. Not everyone deserves unlimited chances. Not everyone deserves continued access simply because they once had it. The stronger version of yourself began making decisions based on self-respect rather than fear. Fear once convinced you to stay silent. Fear once convinced you to settle. Fear once convinced you to tolerate what should have never been accepted. But strength replaced that fear with clarity. You finally understood that protecting yourself is not selfish. Valuing yourself is not arrogance. Walking away from what damages your spirit is not cruelty. The person you became was not harder because life made you bitter. The person you became was harder because life taught you the value of your own worth, and you finally stopped asking permission to defend it. There comes a moment in every transformation when the people around you begin to notice that something is different. They may not be able to explain it. They may not even understand it themselves, but they can feel it. The energy you carry is no longer the same they once knew has changed, not because you decided to become someone else, but because life demanded that you become more of who you truly are. The version of you that spent years hiding its strength, suppressing its voice, and seeking approval from people who never deserved that power is slowly disappearing. In its place stands someone far more dangerous to limitations, manipulation, and fear. For years, certain people felt comfortable underestimating you. They looked at your kindness and assumed you lacked strength. They looked at your patience and assumed you lacked confidence. They looked at your silence and assumed you had nothing to say. They created an image of you based on what was convenient for them to believe. That image allowed them to feel superior. It allowed them to ignore your potential because acknowledging it would have forced them to reconsider their own assumptions. What they failed to understand was that silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes silence is observation, sometimes silence is discipline, sometimes silence is preparation. While they were busy judging your current position, you were learning. While they were busy doubting your abilities, you were growing. While they were busy focusing on who you used to be, You were becoming someone entirely different. Growth often happens in places nobody can see. The strongest transformations are rarely public. They happen during lonely nights, difficult decisions, painful lessons, and moments when nobody is watching. The world only notices the result. It rarely sees the process. People see confidence, but not the years of self-doubt that came before it. They see strength, but not the countless struggles that built it. They see resilience, but not the battles fought in private. Because they never witnessed the process, the outcome appears sudden to them. One day they look at you and wonder what happened. They wonder why their opinions no longer affect you. They wonder why their criticism no longer controls your emotions. They wonder why the tactics that once worked have suddenly become ineffective. What they fail to realize is that the person they once influenced no longer exists in the same form. Experience has changed you. Pain has educated you. Adversity has refined you. The version of you they feared was never created overnight. It was built one lesson at a time. Every betrayal taught awareness. Every rejection taught self-worth. Every setback taught resilience. Disappointment forced growth. The strength they now see is simply the accumulation of everything you survived. It is the result of refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. It is the result of continuing to believe in your future when circumstances suggested otherwise. As your confidence expanded, something else began to disappear. The need for validation slowly faded away. You stopped measuring your value through other people's opinions. You stopped seeking approval from those who never recognized your worth. You stopped allowing criticism from unqualified voices to shape your decisions. That freedom changed everything. A person who no longer depends on external validation becomes difficult to control. Their decisions are no longer driven by fear of rejection. Their identity is no longer built upon the expectations of others. This is often the stage where people become uncomfortable. They were comfortable when you doubted yourself. They were comfortable when you asked for permission. They were comfortable when your confidence remained small enough to fit inside their expectations. But now something has shifted. You carry yourself differently. You think differently. You no longer seek acceptance from rooms that refuse to appreciate your presence. The most powerful part of this transformation is that it does not require revenge. It does not require proving anything to anyone. The strongest response to doubt is growth. The strongest response to disrespect is success. The strongest response to being underestimated is becoming everything they believed you could never become. There is no need to announce your evolution. There is no need to convince anyone of your value. Your actions speak louder than explanations ever could. The person standing before the world today is not the fragile version others once assumed you were. This version carries wisdom earned through hardship, confidence earned through experience, and strength earned through survival. The potential that others overlooked has finally emerged from the shadows, and the presence they once ignored has become impossible to dismiss. One of the greatest burdens a person can carry is being misunderstood, not because misunderstanding changes who you are, but because it forces you to watch people create stories about you that have nothing to do with reality. There were times when others painted you as the problem simply because you stopped accepting what hurt you. There were moments when people called you difficult because you finally developed boundaries. There were situations where they labeled you cold because you stopped giving endless chances to those who repeatedly abused your trust. The moment you began protecting your peace, some people became uncomfortable. Rather than examining their own behavior, they chose to rewrite the story and place you in the role of the villain. For a long time, that misunderstanding bothered you. You wanted people to see your intentions. You wanted them to understand your heart. You wanted them to recognize the sacrifices you made, the loyalty you showed, and the patience you demonstrated. You believed that if you explained yourself enough, people would eventually see the truth. So you spent energy defending your character, clarifying your actions, and trying to correct false perceptions. Yet no matter how much effort you invested, some people remained committed to misunderstanding you. That is when an important realization began to emerge. Not everyone misunderstands you by accident. Some people misunderstand you because the truth would require accountability. If they acknowledged your perspective, they would have to acknowledge their own actions. If they admitted your boundaries were reasonable, they would have to admit they benefited from your lack of them. If they accepted your growth, they would have to confront the ways they tried to keep you small. For certain individuals, misunderstanding you is easier than confronting themselves. As painful as that truth can be, it also creates freedom. The moment you stop trying to convince everyone to understand you, you reclaim enormous amounts of energy. You stop chasing validation. You stop seeking approval from people determined to withhold it. You stop performing for audiences that have already decided what role they want you to play. Instead, you focus on living according to your values rather than their opinions. The irony is that the people who called you the villain often witnessed only the final chapter. They saw the moment you walked away, but not the years you spent trying to make things work. They saw the boundary, but not the countless times that boundary was ignored before it appeared. They saw the firmness in your voice, but not the patience that came before it. They judged your reaction without understanding the history that created it. What appeared sudden to them was often the result of accumulated disappointment, stretching across months or years. You know the truth of your journey. You know how many chances were given. You know how much understanding was offered. You know how many times you chose peace over conflict. You know how often you absorbed pain in silence rather than creating chaos around you. Those experiences shaped you in ways outsiders may never fully understand, and that is perfectly acceptable. Understanding from others is not a requirement for self-respect. Become the more you realize that being perceived as the villain in someone else's story does not automatically make you wrong. Sometimes growth requires disappointing people. Sometimes healing requires distance. Sometimes self-respect requires decisions that others dislike. People who benefited from your self-sacrifice will rarely celebrate your independence. People who enjoyed unlimited access to your energy will rarely applaud your boundaries. Their disappointment is often evidence that the change was necessary. What matters is not the role they assign you. What matters is the integrity with which you live your life. You know whether your intentions are honest. You know whether your actions align with your values. You know whether your decisions are rooted in wisdom rather than bitterness. When those foundations are strong, external labels lose much of their power. The most remarkable truth is that you were never the villain they claimed you were. Long before the disappointments, long before the betrayals, long before the misunderstandings, you approached life with kindness, compassion, patience, and genuine care for others. Those qualities were real. They were never weaknesses. They were evidence of a beautiful spirit. The hardships you endured did not erase those qualities. They refined them. They taught you where to place your trust, where to invest your energy, and when to protect your heart. Beneath every lesson, every scar, every boundary, and every transformation, the same person still exists. The difference is that wisdom now stands beside kindness. Strength now stands beside compassion. Awareness now stands beside hope. You were never the villain in this story. You were the angel all along. And the trials of life simply forced that angel to grow powerful enough to survive in a world that often mistook goodness for weakness.